have to really kind of make sure that those are intertwined. But if they need separate products and they need separate database sets, then that can be managed efficiently. And I think the way to go, as you mentioned, is having that. Okay, you have your source systems, and I know the medallion architecture is quite popular right now, so I'll use that in that frame of reference. But your source systems, which is the bronze layer, and then those kind of feed into that central data hub of the warehouse, which is your silver layer. It's clean, it's organized, hopefully. Realistically, mostly it's not, but hopefully that data warehouse is somewhat organized. And you could ideally organize it in the way that the business would think about it. So in terms of customers or in terms of sales, instead of just having like a mess of data tables in the warehouse, which is no fun for anybody. So that's the silver layer. And then the gold layer is that kind of the individual data marts that are curated for those teams and for those data products that they want to build, right? And, and
Mhm.
that and that kind of then gives you those three levels of where you start from sourcing data to where your data is in a final curated state that then can be input into the data products. And when I talk about data products, by the way, I'm talking more about analytical products and end user applications rather than the
Yeah.
actual data sets that feed that. I know a lot of people say like a data table is a data product, but in my mind, it creates a lot of confusion, especially for end users who aren't used to data tables being data products. So how do you manage that? But yeah,
Yeah, so you're right. For me, again, for me as well, data product is something which is generating a value for the business, a value for the organization. You're serving to someone. So we go one step back, right? As you're saying, few things in data world are not data product, few things are data product. So which brings us to our basic question, data ecosystem. Within data ecosystem, what data artifacts you bring in? You bring OLTP application, OLAP applications, dimension models. Which components of data artifact you bring into data ecosystem?
I mean, I think you can bring in everything. I mean, for me though, the most important thing is not what you're bringing into the data ecosystem from source data. It's how you structure what you're bringing in. There's so many different, especially now, there's so many different types of data sources. Like there's operational tools, CRMs, kind of example, or ERPs. There's like old static SQL databases. There's market data that can be pulled like third party, like Nielsen reports or what have you. There's open source data. So there's tons of data that can come in, but the data ecosystem is about structuring it in a way that makes sense. And I mean that's kind of like what my newsletter is about. It's about simplifying the complexity of the data ecosystem. And for me, it's about when I'm doing this with the client, especially when I map out that client's data ecosystem, it's simplifying the mess of source systems and data integrations that they have into kind of like, okay, this is what it actually means at a high level. Obviously, when you go past that and into the detail of it, it's going to get more complicated. But you need your business stakeholders and your leaders to understand what that data world looks like from a high level. Because if you don't do that, then they continue to think that data is a black box and they're just not going to fund it or invest in it. And that's the biggest thing for me about the data ecosystem is actually just explaining it and how it works at a high level to make sure that people don't feel like it's a black box and they feel like that they're involved and they know what's going on and that they what they get out of it at the end of the day, they can trust that.
Okay. So tell us about this data product because there are a lot of confusions are there in the market right now, especially the difference between definitions of data product and data as a product. Right? Can you
Yeah.
share your opinion on these two things?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote I wrote a three-part series on data products last year, and like the first one, which was what is a data product, was is actually my best running article in my Substack. Um, so highly recommend you give it a read. But for me, I think it's exactly what you said, Mustafa. It's like you need to your data products need to drive value for the end stakeholders, and in the end, us as a data team, we're not the end users. We're not kind of the consumer of this data. We are there to support the rest of the organization. So if all the organization is over here, like sales, marketing, finance, whatever, data should be a horizontal under those, enabling those different use cases by building those business ready data products, right? And none of the people in the business, they don't really, yes, they can work with Excel and they can read a CSV file or what have you, but to them, a data table is not a product. It's a source of information. A data product needs to be catered to them and enable them to do their job in an easier way, in
Mhm.
a user friendly way. And I think that's just what it is. And the point where you get there is actually the analytical side of bringing insights from the data and presenting that to the end users, to the business stakeholders. On the flip side, you have data as a product. And I think there's still value to that terminology and that idea. I think just the word product is just so overused that they couldn't find a better word for them. Like, ah, it's a product. Why not? So I think if they call it something else, that'd be great. But data as a product is make saying, okay, if the data is accessible, if it's clean, if it's ready, then people can use it as a product, as something, but in my mind, I see it as it's a raw material. It's a curated raw material that then can be pieced together with other things to create a product.
Yes.
And it's just like building like a something in Lego or something, right? You have these blocks. These blocks are not products. That's not what you're buying. You're buying the spaceship that's on the box. That's the product, right? The blocks just come together to build that spaceship. And that's how I kind of think about it from a data perspective is you
Mhm.
need to you want the actual output rather than the inputs required to get there.
So actually, you just put it very good in a way that you are saying data as a product is a block to create a data product. So a product which is a data product can be a data product, but mostly data as a product is serving to some other data product to generate a value. So I'm on the same page on that one as well. Okay, let's go towards the challenges and risks from moving from centralized to decentralized versus ecosystem slash federated approach. Which kind of challenges do you foresee as a data strategist?
So most organizations that have a centralized data team, how that centralized data team gets spun up is they literally start a new team called data. They hire a data leader. He or she hires a bunch of engineers, scientists, analysts, whatever. And they spin up a team and they start doing stuff and they kind of feed and take in requests from the business and create those outputs for them. And that mentality is okay. Data is another vertical over here, siloed, but it's centralized because it's all in one place, right? Um, the problem with how that's done is usually it's spun up just ad hoc, or it's very kind of a they don't give it much thought process of how it's set up and where it's set up in the organization. So when they move to decentralize, what they are doing is they're adding a lot of complexity to a existing team that had no underlying structure or foundations. And what you see is, okay, you like person A, you're now serving the sales team. Person B, you're serving the marketing team. Person C, you're serving the ops team. Those people never had the foundations in place to kind of work together well. um, they had in the past because they were on a centralized team, but work together well in a decentralized environment. So they start moving to a decentralized environment and they create silos within each other. They're getting more integrated with the actual teams they're working with, but there's no integration between them. Whereas a centralized environment, there's integration between them, but not as much within the team that they're working with. So it's kind of like a what do you want as an organization? And if you are looking to move to decentralized perspective or even a hybrid area, you need to set up the processes, the ways of working to kind of enable that. Because if people don't know how to work together when they're on separate teams, when they're in different reporting lines, when they're not talking every day, then how are you going to succeed? Especially given how interconnected so many data elements are and how much you want your organizational data to kind of come from one source of truth.
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest challenge. Although there are challenges of, you know, decentralized, as you mentioned, engineering teams or run and maintenance teams. Then there's a challenge of decentralized infrastructures where overhead comes, right? Last
Mm,
time there were a lot of things which was shared. Now nothing is shared, right? But along with that, I would say if you go towards decentralized, normally I don't like decentralized because decentralized is normally in silos. I like federated where you have a, actually, by the way, a new term is coming, data practice management, which sits inside the federated. So you have centralized, you have decentralized. In the middle, this federated data practice management team sits, who looks into everything what is happening into decentralized approach, like which kind of data coming. So biggest challenge which comes is no single source of truth because everybody is building their own models, right? So
yeah.
to suggest us, tell us how this challenge we face that there will not be any single source of truth because there will be duplication of data. So how we handle this thing?
Yeah, I think you made a great point that I forgot as well is the technology element. So when you decentralize, usually it starts out that your technologies are very similar because it's coming from that centralized source and they're using the same stuff. But then it starts to veer and people start using different analytical tools or
Yeah.
engineering packages and they use different schema. They build schemas in different ways, which then creates more and more confusion. And that kind of whole tech angle as well is a huge problem with that. You mentioned, and not to mention added cost because you're paying for multiple tools and multiple technologies. You mentioned like how do you deal with it? And again, I think it goes back to what I was talking about is the biggest thing is to I mean, maybe I'm biased because I'm a data strategy person, but it's to take a strategic lens on these things, right? Like you don't go and do a huge business transformation of your organization without thinking about strategically in the long term of why you're doing that. So why would you do that from a data perspective? Like companies will do a migration, they'll do uh, decentralization. They'll do all these things without thinking about the strategy. They're like, okay, you know what? Cost savings. They'll do this. That's fine. But like, there's so many different elements to it. And I think thinking about it from a strategic perspective is super necessary. And within that, I would say like, where are you today? What are the gaps? And what are the recommendations to improve? Where do you want to go tomorrow? So identifying kind of what that future state looks like that's kind of like one big chunk and element that you should do. And the where are you today is like that technical audit and data audit element. The other thing to think about is that change management. So how do we actually bring people along? How do we make sure that they are heard, that they know what they're doing, that they know where they're going? So that change management is a huge bit, and that involves conversations, workshops, interviews. A lot of times companies are like, "Hey, we're going to do this," goes off in that direction, doesn't let anybody know, doesn't let anybody talk about it. They're just like, tell them, okay, this is what you do now. And that kind of creates a bad morale. It creates a lot of problems, painstaking elements, and such. The third kind of big bucket to think about is like governance. So, how are teams going to be governed moving forward in this new structure? And how would they work together? And I think a lot of people ignore governance because they're like, oh, we want to be agile. We're gonna work work in a fast and quick basis, but like realistically, agile is an excuse for not having any governance documents or any planning on processes on how to work, which leads to a lot of problems and confusion. And then I think the final thing to consider and to factor in doing this is what is the actual realistic ROI and investment required to achieve what you need to do. I
Yeah.
think a lot of, I'm going back to migrations because these are very common, but a lot of migrations, for example, are done because Microsoft or Google come in and say, like, hey, we can do this a lot cheaper than the other guys. And so we're going to give you a bunch of credits, do this migration. It'll take you like a year. It'll be
Yeah.
good, and it'll be all be covered by us.